we are at the beginning of a 10-year period with a new map, and like what a great time to be forward thinking about like what does the 11th ward of the future look like. Like ideally, what would we love to see, and let's work backwards from that. I think that can inform so many things, especially from a development perspective. Like what would we love to see more of, what don't we have today that we would love to have, and like what do we frankly have enough of at this point.
Hello and welcome to the Cloutcast. I'm Erin Hegarty and I'll be your host this week. Alderwoman Nicole Lee was sworn into office in March, marking a historic moment as she became the first woman to represent the 11th Ward and the City Council's first Chinese American alderman. She's now been representing the 11th Ward for almost 4 months, so I wanted to check in with her to see how those first few months have gone, what plans she has for her ward, and what issues she wants to tackle citywide. And with the city election a short 7 months away, I also wanted to ask her whether she'll run for election. I sat down with Lee in her Bridgeport office to discuss all those questions and more. Let's dive in. Here we are in the 11th Ward, in the 11th Ward office. You were sworn in March, so you've now been a member of City Council for 4 months, a full quarter at this point. You've seen a new ward map approved, you've attended committee meetings, council meetings, and soon you'll launch into budget season.
Oh boy.
How's it going? And do you think you have a good handle now on ward stuff and, you know, the city hall side of things?
I think things are going well. I don't really have a benchmark for that. As far as whether or not I feel like I have a good handle, I have a much better handle than I did when I was counting my time by days. So I feel like I've been here way longer than 3.5 months, going on 4. But at the same time, I know that there's just still so much to learn. And as you pointed out, I haven't been through a full cycle of anything yet. So, you know, I've got some council meetings under my belt. I've attended a number of committee meetings where I do feel like progressively, as I spend more time doing this job, I get a little bit better at it every time. And a little bit more comfortable asking questions and, you know, figuring out ways to engage my constituents about some of the things that we're dealing with as well. Budget season, though, I feel like I've got to get on a special workout for, right? I've heard people have been warning me about budget season and what that's going to be like. So I'm hoping to do a little prep before we really launch into that, including attending one of the sessions that the mayor is going to be having about the budget.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I can say from my experience, I started covering City Hall right at budget season, so it's good and bad. I mean, you learn a lot in a very short period of time, or at least I did. So I'm guessing you will.
I feel like that has been the story of my entire aldermanic life thus far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What were the first few months like? Were there people? You know, was there any member of City Council who kind of like took you under their wing and said, this is how things get done, you know, this is where the bathrooms are, this is, you know, don't use this, I don't know, drinking fountain or something because it doesn't work, and did you rely a lot on, you know, ward staff to help you on the ward level?
I would say that. So leading up to the confirmation, I did actually reach out to every single alderperson to try to answer any questions that they might have. And really, obviously, I take nothing for granted. You know, I know that I was the mayor's choice, and I didn't assume everybody would just automatically vote for me. So I did do some outreach, and what I found overwhelmingly, the people that I talked to, was that regardless of sort of where you ended up on a political spectrum necessarily, it's very much a brother and sisterhood, if you will, because we are all in the same boat at the end of the day, facing a lot of the same challenges. So everybody was actually very generous with me, endlessly and consistently. I heard, you know, we all want you to be successful. So there were many offers of help, like if you need something, you can call my chief of staff. But I have developed some alder buddies and some alder mentors. You know, Michelle Harris was part of the selection committee, so she's been really great to me in terms of just being a resource. If I have a question about something, she's one of the first calls that I'll make. I've also, you know, enjoyed a really great relationship with Alderman Tunney. I'm not on the zoning committee, but having spent a little bit more time with him during the casino conversations when I would attend meetings, and he and his staff have been really great in terms of just helping us get up to speed on some things. And then Andre Vasquez has been wonderfully generous to me, as has Maria Haddon. I'm sure I'm going to be forgetting some people here, but honestly, I haven't had a bad experience. Honestly, everybody wants to be helpful, and we're all committed to each other's success. Again, even if we're on other sides. But yeah, it's been great. People have been really wonderful to me. Sam Nugent's been great as well, and Harry Osterman. His ward covers Uptown. And I used to be on the board of Chinese Mutual Aid Association. So we have some common people. Okay. And he was one of the earlier older people that reached out and just offered whatever support he could. So it's been really wonderful. And as far as the staff goes, I'm really proud of the staff we have in this office. I mentioned to you earlier, this office was painted while I was away, and they surprised me with that. I feel super supported. I think we mesh really well, and we're all here for the same thing, which is to serve the constituents of the 11th Ward. And that took some time to build up. When we've got some of my predecessor staff that are still here, and a few folks that are not. I think that's just what it takes. You kind of go through these cycles, and I'm hoping that we're settling in nicely now, and trying to unclog some of the backlogs of things.
Yeah, was there a list of things to do when the ward got here? Continued on, and I'm sure things didn't go unattended, but things didn't go unattended. I don't know. How did you work through that now that you've been in office for a little while?
Slowly but surely, I think, is the best way to describe how we worked through it. The staff that was still here, hats off to them, and I consistently I thanked them and appreciated them for everything that they did to keep the office running and to keep the constituent services going. But obviously, there were many things that couldn't be done without an aldermanic approval. Yeah. So the basic services, I think, still got taken care of very well, and it was the more sort of acute things that may have come up, zoning issues, that sort of thing, sure. That just required an aldermanic approval. And, I wasn't prepared to do that from day one because I needed to figure out kind of what these decisions were. My biggest fear is making a decision without having all of the information, and then anything that I do here has long-term repercussions. Mm-hmm. And that is not lost on me. And I think if I think about it too long, it could be really debilitating. So I try not to. I try to compartmentalize that a bit. But there was, obviously, there had been meetings that had been on the schedule. People had their projects held up because of it. That on top of COVID leading up to it was just, unfortunately, there are a good number of residents who were sort of disserviced in that way, just some of the interruptions and delays. I feel good that we are pecking away at that, and we've got things rolling a little bit better now. Now we've got the extra added benefit of being in a transition from one map to another. So there's all of that as well.
So kind of something that you mentioned, when it comes to legislation and zoning changes and stuff. So of course, over the past few months, you've introduced routine monthly legislation like parking permits, tributes to honoring residents, and zoning amendments, sign permits. But is there anything bigger or citywide that you're working on? Not that sign permits are not, a big issue, because they are.
Especially for those business owners.
And parking permits are, a thing as well. But what will the first piece of citywide legislation sponsored by Nicole Lee look like? Or do you know that yet?
It's a great question. I'm still asking that question of myself. I'll tell you some of the areas that I'm interested in. Just in the first 3.5 months that I've been in office, safety is something that is a major concern, I think, across the city, and it's no different here in the 11th Ward. There have been a lot of shootings across the city, but in the last 3 or 4 weeks, a woman lost her life as an innocent bystander. It was not in the 11th Ward, but it will be in the 11th Ward in the new map, and that's in Chinatown, blocks away from my house. Mm-hmm. And then the following week, there was yet another shooting. And as I'm talking to residents and our dedicated police officers about, some of the challenges, I learned recently, that, investigating these crimes is very difficult too, and what's involved in it. There's so many different layers to it. I know that there's only so many things that we can do to help the police, but where we can, and where we can write legislation to help making investigations easier, to sort of compel, business owners to be more responsive so that we can pursue these cases more. That's something that I'm doing some research into right now. Okay. And on the whole issue of mental health, not just the really tragic suicides that have happened in the last 10 days. I'm a firm believer in mental health. I feel like we should do everything that we can to make sure everybody has access to it, especially those that sort of face the most traumas in their daily lives in the service of the people of the city of Chicago. Mm-hmm. So I'll be interested in sort of those types of things. And obviously, I've talked a lot in public about my commitment to this high school for the near South area. And those are the three I'll give you right now.
So let's revisit all of those here. When it comes to safety, public safety, in preparing for this interview, I looked at, what you said when you were sworn in. And I think you said, safety, safety, safety. It's one of, if not your top priority. What do you think the city is doing right in public safety strategy right now? Where do you think there should be some sort of expansion? And you mentioned making cases easier to investigate, but is there anything else that you think the city should be looking at as far as keeping residents in your ward and citywide safe?
Yeah, there's some obvious things that I think are really challenging, right? We don't have enough police for the needs that we have today. Now, I know that can also be rather controversial to some, because I think there's definitely a segment of the population that feels like we're over-policed. And I don't think there's like an either or sort of proposition in all of this. I really do think we have to take a comprehensive approach. There's no doubt. Every month we're settling lawsuits, right? There's no doubt that there are many things that still need to be fixed about about how we're policing. And I think there's still much work to be done to strike the right balance between making sure that police can do their jobs and do it in a way that is safe for them, as well as sort of acknowledges some of the things that really, frankly, weren't done so well in the past in terms of, chasing and whatnot. I think that there's potential for, and I think there's a sense that there's been an over-rotation. And I think a general sentiment that I hear in and around through my constituents is that, police are walking around with their hands tied behind their backs, and it makes it really difficult. So I don't know what the answer is for that, right? Because I see both sides of it. And I think that's the thing that we have to do, is to be able to see all sides of this. Because I think all too often it's very easy to just make it an either or scenario. Like, we have to take all the money away and reallocate it everywhere. I don't think that's the answer. I believe that in my ward, especially that I hear from my constituents, that, we appreciate the work that the police are doing. We'd like to get them some more support.
And on that topic of officer support, during as we're talking yesterday, but when you're listening, probably last week, Alderman introduced several proposals aiming to kind of help with officer mental health and the challenges that they face. And I know you signed on to a few of those proposals, calling for, hearing on officer mental health, and another one that would, seeks to protect officers' days of rest. Do you think enough is being done right now to, help officers and support them? Or why is it important for the city council, the legislative body, to, take up these proposals and have these hearings and try to, lend support to the police?
I think it's really important for the city council to hold these hearings, because we need the information. We're not going to be able to I think, support the police who support the city ultimately, without some of that knowledge. And I think, it behooves us to be as informed as possible on these issues. Are we doing enough? It's never enough anywhere, Erin. I mean, like, and this, the thing that I signed on to for the day off, I believe it's necessary for especially our police officers to have. Listen, I know what I'm like when I've and I have like a relatively stressful job, and I go at a high pace a lot, but it's nothing compared to what our police officers are facing on a daily basis. And I'm able to carve out a day. I have that ability, and our officers don't have that today. I think it's really important. And the flip side to that, too, and another concern that I have, and that's something that I want to take up with my colleagues, is the reality is, yes, I agree that there should be the opportunity to have the day, like that should be somehow required within a certain amount of time, because they need time to like refresh themselves mentally, emotionally, and physically. They need to be with their families and really be right for the job. The flip side to that is, because we are in a situation where we're at a shortage in terms of personnel, that puts even more pressure on the people that are already out there. So you can't have one without the other. And this is to my point earlier, Erin. We have to look at this in a very comprehensive way. So we can't just ask for one thing without seeing what the downstream sort of effects are of any of these. So I think early on in this conversation with that specific piece of legislation, I'm going to be looking to engage with my colleagues about how do we make sure that anything else that this will impact is being addressed somehow.
And then switching over to the high school. So it wouldn't be just the Chinatown High School, right? It
No.
would be the near South Side or South Loop High School. I'm not quite sure. I've seen it referred to as different terms, but is this the location that you think your constituents had in mind for a potential high school? I know it's been kind of controversial because I don't know if it's officially proposed yet, but they're looking at land that is former public housing. And, some people are saying, well, schools are great, but also we need more housing.
And both things are true.
Right.
So yeah, I'd love to talk about that. Right. So I know that in the media, this high school has been referred to as the Chinatown High School. It is not. I'll go on the record, and I will be adamant about that. This high school is not meant to serve one community exclusively.
Yeah, which high school does.
Well, exactly. But it's an easy thing. I don't want to. I think what that does is it just sort of breeds more division, frankly, because it begins to pit one community against another, as if it's the needs of one community. In this case, when the people refer to it as the Chinatown High School, the Chinatown High School is going to take the public housing. That's like, if you're only reading headlines, which sadly many people do these days, that's what you're picking up on. And from my perspective, nothing could be further from the truth. The Near South High School, that's what CPS is calling it, is intended to serve the South Loop, Chinatown, which technically isn't one of the 77 neighborhoods. It's part of Armour Square, Bridgeport, and some parts of Bronzeville to the north, and Fuller Park actually is probably the more formal name for it.
Sure.
It's absolutely true that CPS has been losing enrollment, and that the city of Chicago has also, seen and experienced people moving out. Also true that, demographics have changed. We saw that with the ward remap. We're going to have a brand new 34th ward in a place that 34th ward never was before because of where people are choosing to live. And the same is true for this Near South area. The South Loop continues to grow, as has Chinatown, as has the Asian population in and around the 11th ward. And there hasn't been a new neighborhood high school in this area in the sort of last 30 years. I don't know when the last time a neighborhood high school was open, but our current neighborhood high schools for these areas are Phillips Academy and Tilden, which is currently in the 11th ward in the southern part of the ward. And Tilden is under enrolled, and Phillips has, I want to say, about and 500 to 800 students to it. That's a big swing. I just can't remember the number, but more than Tilden has today. And families and students in these areas are choosing to go way farther to get to more, in their opinions at least, quality educational opportunities. You know, up to students down here are going to 95 different schools. Wow. Now, one of the things, I'm a CPS kid. I went to Whitney Young, and it was when you got to be high school age, you just, this is like a rite of passage. This is how things worked, and you didn't know any better. So like taking a bus and a train and maybe another bus to get to your high school was just what you did. Like, and the people that got to like walk or ride their bikes to school, they were the suburban kids. Like, I didn't know anybody that walked to high school, literally. I think we need to do better for our students because all too often what's happening today is, parents are faced with, we have great elementary schools, especially in this area, right? We have lots of like 1+ rated elementary schools. And when it comes to time for high school, everybody stresses about selective enrollment. We know how competitive it is. Look, I have a son who's going to be a sophomore, but when he was in 8th grade, it was very, very stressful.
And I'm sure just knowing that that's coming, even, I've watched kids think about high school in 7th, 6th grade. Like, I'm a suburban kid. I did not think about it until 8th grade when someone,
right,
said you're going to high school, and
you're like, okay, that's where I'm going.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, look, and I'm older, so I went to high school in the late 80s, early 90s, and I still had to apply because, I think my neighborhood school at the time might have been Tilden. So, I went and took the test, but it was not nearly as competitive, I guarantee you, as it is today. And we need better neighborhood options because you shouldn't have to go through that level of anxiety if you don't choose to. And there should just be a good place for you to go to. Not a place that you end up at, but a place that you can like make a choice. And that's what this is. Like this high school is a neighborhood high school. To be clear, it is not a selective enrollment high school. So if you live within the boundary, you will be guaranteed a seat. And that is something that I think is an incredible opportunity. To your question about, the CHA piece of this, yes, the property that CPS has proposed is at 24th and State, and it is on the former site of the Harold Ickes housing project, public housing project. And there was a commitment that was made to the former residents to return affordable units. And I'm committed that happen, or that commitment be fulfilled on. So I don't, again, you're going to hear me, you'll probably get really tired of me, but I think both things can be true. I think the really amazing opportunity here is to have a brand new high school built with community input about what the community needs are, and have housing that's like right across the street, quite literally, new housing at that. CPS, as I understand it, is proposing some sort of land swap where, they potentially purchase other property that's a couple blocks away. So what was very reassuring to me, at least, and I don't think I'm done having conversations about the impact of this, because I want to understand all of it. Again, because I don't believe in this, like, it's got to be either or. I think that there's a way for us to have both and together. Because having a high school, having an institution, an anchor institution in this part of the community, and it's in Alderman Dowell's ward. Look, there were plenty of people who were just like, you should fight for it to be in your ward. There's no space in the 11th ward. And I think it's got to make sense, right? So this location is 24th and State. It's in the 3rd ward. Alderman Dowell and I have many conversations, and I think we share this vision of wanting something that is very integrated and diverse, that represents all of the different residents of our changing community down here. Because you don't have that south of Lincoln Park, really. I think it would be incredible to start to break down some of those really, I think institutionally over time, that's what happened. And we can fix that, or begin to at least chart a new path.
Well, staying on ward-specific topics, there have been a lot of distribution warehouses popping up in the 11th ward. Is that something, I mean, it's good to have businesses come to your ward, your community. Is it something that you think should continue? Should there be further regulations on where those can operate, or do you have thoughts on warehouses like that?
I have thoughts. My first thought is I'm really glad that those weren't on my watch when they were all put in. Mm-hmm. I understand there was a lot of there has been a lot of community concern, and I understand where that comes from. Truck traffic is not it's not a small thing, right? And every community that's sort of along the I-55 corridor, I think, becomes very attractive for these distribution places. And it's, from a commerce perspective, I think it's great. It's good to have businesses located in your ward. It means jobs. It means business is being sort of supported sort of in your neighborhood, but it's also, cause and effect, right? That means more truck traffic, exhaust, pollution, safety concerns over like trucks barreling down a street. That's more wear and tear on your infrastructure as well. I think that, what I'm interested in doing is really like engaging the community about like, what would we love to see more of? What would we love to see less of? I'd love to have like a strategic document that does that, right? And This is my wish list right now, Erin.
Especially with, not starting fresh, but with the new
being
board
so new. Yes, absolutely.
Seems like a good time.
You are totally
like
smelling what I'm stepping in right now, Erin. We are at the beginning of a 10-year period with a new map, and like what a great time to be forward thinking about like what does the 11th ward of the future look like? Like ideally, what would we love to see? And let's work backwards from that. I think that can inform so many things, especially from a development perspective. Like what would we love to see more of? What don't we have today that we would love to have? And like what do we frankly have enough of at this point? Right. And if somebody new is going to come in, like what sort of things does the community demand in terms of like, benefit to the community? Lakeshore Recycling is already like, this happened before I got here, but they're opening a new facility. They're working on it. I met with their CEO, and we had a conversation about like what can we do for the community. He's already building into that sort of an educational piece so people understand what's going on there. It's a sorting facility, so they're not, I feel like that is probably the best thing that they could be doing. I think I'd have a lot of other trouble if they were like melting metals down, right? Yeah. But it's a sorting facility. And I asked if they would consider like opening up their facility for people to come bring their recycling to. Because today we only get recycling picked up like twice a month. Mm-hmm. That's assuming everything's on schedule too. That doesn't always happen.
And that someone doesn't throw something weird in the recycle bin.
That doesn't belong. I mean, like pizza boxes. Everybody listen to me. Pizza boxes are not recyclable. That is now trash. Okay, so please do not put those in the recycle bins. Pay attention to those cards that the city sends you about what's recyclable and what's not. That's always on my refrigerator.
I'm that neighbor that's put signs that like stop throwing this in our buildings.
This is not recycling. Yeah, and what I'm hopeful for is like as they bring school groups to a facility like that they do begin to understand, oh, this is how this works. Like and how much more trash is produced after they sort through things. Like it's staggering to understand how much people put in a recycle bin that is actually trash, and then like there's even more. I mean, there's a ripple effect to all of it. You may be thinking you're doing a really great thing by putting what you believe is recycling into a recycling bin, and then later at the sorting facility. Now it's been trucked to a sorting facility. Now it's got to be sorted out, and then it's generated trash, and that trash now then has to be taken to a landfill. So the trucking piece of that alone with the exhaust and the air pollution is just yet another thing. I mean, again, so much of this could be daunting and make you want to just stay in bed and pull the covers up over your head if you think too long about it. But we need to think about those things.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think I just went all over the place there, Erin. But to answer your question about just warehouses and like what I'd like to see, I think we have plenty of warehouses right now. I'm not super excited about more at this point. And I think, I'm much more interested at this point about really figuring out a bigger picture before we make any more sort of like major decisions about bigger developments of those types. Because there may still be places for those in the ward. I mean, we have the stockyards sort of piece of the ward that's very industrial. And it's nice that it is sort of like tucked away in that corner. It's not sort of interspersed everywhere.
I've gotten stuck in there.
Yeah, it's confusing in there.
Okay. So I think we should talk a little bit about yesterday's city council meeting.
Let's do it.
There were a lot of pieces of legislation that moved through or didn't move through. One of them was the Alderman Anthony Beale's proposal to raise the threshold at which people are ticketed outside of
For speed cameras.
some schools and parks for speed cameras. Did you hear? You voted.
I voted against it.
Did you hear from constituents on that? Was that something? I know safety is more than just how.
Oh,
police,
1,000%.
Interact with the community. So was that something that you heard from, your constituents about, or what did you think about that?
This is great. I just had this conversation with a constituent this morning that I took a walk with. I've been inviting constituents to tell me what their favorite walking paths are. So, I heard from people on both sides of it. I got lots of email from people who felt very much that this program, the way it is today, they call it a cash grab. And when I go out and I've been engaging people in the community about safety, I get all kinds of requests for speed bumps. How do we slow traffic down? The drag racing is terrible around here. You're right here by a park and people zoom down this road at 60, 70 miles an hour. Mine is a ward that frankly would probably like more cameras. I have multiple requests at this point, and right now we can't get them. We're a little bit different here. And I think raising the speed limit at the threshold for when a citation is issued is ostensibly giving people a pass to go even faster. And we know there's plenty of evidence to prove that, at higher speeds, people are less likely to survive these. And people sort of, I think, post-COVID, as people have emerged from being just locked up inside, it's a little scary to be out there driving it or riding a bicycle. I have a 15-year-old son that rides his bike everywhere. And I worry about him constantly because so many people don't pay attention to bike lanes, or they'll park in the bike lane, and then we know what happens when that happens as well. And especially around parks and schools. I've got a lot of families here. I've got a lot of senior citizens. And those are, if you look at the fatalities that have happened this year, it's a big gap. They're kids and elderly. They're more at risk at the end of the day. So it didn't give me pause to vote against that. Look, I've gotten plenty of those tickets, and I understand that it's a financial burden. I think we also have to take a look at, the equitable distribution of this. One of the questions that I asked in one of the earlier hearings was like, how was it determined initially, like where these cameras would go? I'd like more, but like I'd also like an answer to like why there's so many, or if the understanding is if there's disproportionately hitting people who are Black and brown, then let's talk about that. But in these places where the cameras are, and I think Alderman Beale said it himself, like there were no deaths. And I was like, to me, that means that it's working. Actually, it's not a reason to not have them. And the city, I think, has done a good job. And I think maybe we need to talk more about this Clear Path program. Are you familiar with the Clear Path program?
Yes.
Just for your listeners, then, if you're not familiar with it, it's a program that the city has for low-income residents to get some grace, not grace, but some relief on tickets. So you can actually have some of your tickets invalidated, canceled, I guess, whatever the term is, so that you don't have to pay it under certain circumstances. So, I think I like that the city took that approach, right? That they are creating, it's a recognition and an acknowledgement that not everybody can afford to do it. But what we don't want to do is encourage bad behavior that make our streets unsafe.
Right. Staying on the topic of city council, what's it like working with your colleagues and working with the mayor? I know you only have, 3.5, 4 months.
I'm a pro. Come on.
Experience so far. And like we said, you haven't made it through a budget. I mean, you haven't experienced a budget. Not saying you're not going to make it through the budget.
I'm going to make it. You have to think positively for me here, Erin. You've been through a budget yourself, so just have faith for me.
You will make it.
Yeah.
There will be times where you think you won't, but you'll make it.
I will think of this conversation when those times come.
Yes. But what's it been? You were the mayor's pick. Have you talked with her since? Have you worked at all with her? And what's it been like working with your colleagues as well?
It's not a breeze, mostly because everybody's schedules are like bananas. When I have needed a question answered, I've been able to get the answers. Like I'll reach out to my colleagues. Cell phones are great for this. Hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can you give me a call? I think for the most part, I have been able to get answers to questions big and small. Like I had a zoning question. I actually I asked, as I've had conversations with commissioners, let's say, I've said to department heads, what sort of advice would you want to give a baby alderman like me right now? If you were, I'm very malleable at this moment, right? Because I don't know what I don't know, and I'm very open to learning, and I want to do the best that I can for the 11th ward. So that means I check my ego at the door and tell me what I don't know and how to what the best way to do this is. And I rung up Alderman Burnett, and he called me back right away, and he's like, well, here's how I think I would handle that, and here are the things that you need to be concerned with, and here's a great way to do it. So folks have been really generous. I try not to bother them. The mayor's very busy. I try not to bother her with little mundane things. Have I talked to her? Absolutely. I've had a couple of conversations about just things that are going on, places where I might need some assistance with, or where should I go with something like this? I mean, it was a standing offer from her, and I think she said it at the city council yesterday. I know, in practice, who knows how that plays out for her, but I can only speak from my own experience. The staff have been relatively responsive too, in terms of just making sure that I have the things that I need to make decisions or know where to go to get the help from my ward as much as possible.
Campaign season is coming up. Do you think you'll run for election, or I don't know if we call it re-election, next year?
I trip over this question a lot, or people say, well, you're an elected official. I was technically I'm not. And I don't want to claim that, because the people of this ward did not vote for me. I was appointed. Mm-hmm. They're stuck with me for the moment, and I hope I'm doing a good job. And I said from the beginning, I wasn't sure. I think I'm closer to a decision. I having 3 months was sort of always my time frame. I knew I wasn't going to have a ton of time to sort of make that call. I'm definitely leaning in a direction. I don't want to say anything official at this point. But what I will say is that, things don't move quickly in any government, least of all the city of Chicago. I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things. And I don't mean that in a super negative way. It just is what it is, right? I mean, and to a certain extent, certain things should not move fast for very obvious reasons. But I think it takes time to make change and to make a bigger impact. I think more time could be necessary to do that.
So you're leaning toward?
Yeah, I am. I'm leaning towards, wanting to see this through.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I am right now. Like I said, I still have a sliver of time. My mind can still be changed. There's a lot could happen between now and when petitions have to be filed. It's not a small thing. I mean, I don't take it lightly at all. I mean, I will tell you that the first time I felt the sort of weight of the responsibility of an alderperson was around the vote for the curfew. I'm a mom. I have safety concerns of my own for my own children. And I felt like a boomer at one point. But I sat there and I was what I'm doing right now has really long-term implications. And it was stressful but that's part of the job, right? So there's two sides to this job. The day-to-day, taking care of the needs of the residents. It's challenging, as frustrating as that may be. That's sort of the easier part. I love that. That's second nature to me, all of that. Some of these bigger questions of what we're voting on in the city council that will have repercussions for way more than just my ward. It's a big deal. And I don't think anybody should enter into that lightly. Mm-hmm. Did I know what this job was going to look like when I first came? No, I don't think anybody. I won't say. I will only speak for myself. I had some inkling that it's a very complex sort of role, and that there was no way to please everybody, nor should you be trying, right? Constituent this morning that I took the walk with, like, so how does that work? Is it the majority of the people? Is that how you? I said it's a balancing act. There are going to be things that I know. Every decision that I make is probably going to make somebody mad. It's going to upset somebody. We all have to live with that, and we have to make the best choices we can. This is advice that I've gotten from multiple alders. You got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and sleep at night with the decisions that you've made. On certain things, that is a citywide sort of thing that maybe not so popular with many people in the ward, but still the right thing to do for the rest of the city. And I think anybody that feels like, we can just be so insular, just looking at like the ward perspective exclusively, fails to see the role that we all play in the sort of bigger picture of the city. I mean, that the same applies for like other municipalities too. Right. Lack of opportunity on the south side of Chicago absolutely impacts everywhere else. So you can't ignore those. You just can't.
Yeah. All right. Did I miss anything? Is there anything you were itching to talk about?
Itching to talk about?
I mean, I'm interested in these walks you're going on with constituents.
Oh,
I'd love to know like their favorite walking routes and paths and.
Yeah, so I put out a weekly newsletter, and a few weeks ago I put in a plug for Walk the Ward with Alderman Lee. One of the things that I hadn't been able to do in these last 3 months is like get out to just take walks. Like over COVID especially, I took so many walks. I would walk from Chinatown like to the museum campus, up through the Riverwalk, and all the way back. Like that was like a 32,000 step day. There's also just places that I like to walk to around the ward. Palmisano Park is one of them. Pingtown Park is another one. I know that's not 11th ward yet, but it will be.
Lovely park.
Yeah, gorgeous. And if you haven't been there, you should go. Actually, people will probably be mad at me for even talking about that on a podcast. Like we kind of want to keep that to ourselves, but it's here to be shared. I've gone out on a couple of walks so far. Someone took me up on it right away. A woman who's the head of the park council over at Palmisano Park invited me to walk the park with her, and it was great. Like I got to hear a lot of her background in history and sort of history of the park and some of the challenges that face the park and like where I can be of assistance. I'm always really interested in how I can use my position and my influence to make improvements and to sort of help and be of service to the residents in the community here in the 11th ward. It's great, and I get to see other people as we're walking. I'm
sure like seeing what people are talking about is helpful too, or it's memorable.
Yeah. I would say that the one thing that I'm disappointed I haven't had more time for, and we're getting there now, is that I haven't been able to be out in the ward as much as I would like to. I sort of focused the first 3 months or so to really just get the office organized and make sure we had everything sort of humming inside before I started to try to get outside and take on more. And I know how important it is for people to meet me and to see me. And I'm hopeful that people who don't know me yet will give me an opportunity. All I'm looking for is a chance to help out and to prove myself.
Thanks for listening to the Cloutcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Erin Hegarty. We'll be back in another 2 weeks with a new episode for your listening ears. See ya.